As Gaza's people face starvation from Israel's war and siege, the US and EU reveal plans to send supplies. But the US and EU countries have also been busy supplying weapons to Israel. Will their new initiatives help Gaza, or are they just a PR exercise for US President Joe Biden and his EU allies? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Hashem Ahelbarra. Israel's genocidal pounding of Gaza since October continues, with most of the weapons supplied by the US and the EU. Such was the rush to give Israel more bombs to kill Palestinians that emergency powers to bypass the US Congress have been used. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen also rushed to declare her support for Israel in person in October, while several EU states, notably Germany and Italy, are major arms suppliers to Israel. Now, both the US and EU have announced plans to send in vital supplies to Gaza. The routes are a lot more complicated than overland ones shut by Israel. But perhaps there's nothing so complicated as trying to get help to people under attack from weapons you've also supplied. So what are these US and European initiatives really about? Will they help the people of Gaza, or are they really intended to help US President Joe Biden's election campaign and EU leaders as the pages of history fill with the victims of Israel's genocidal war and war crimes? We'll be exploring all this and more with our guests in a few moments. First, this report for Imogen Kimber.
Food parcels are parachuted into Gaza, but they are a tiny fraction of what's needed to feed a population of 2.3 million, where everyone's at risk of starvation because of Israel's blockade and ongoing war.
I have babies. I want to feed them. It is shameful. Shameful.
The EU is working on a maritime corridor with a Spanish charity planning to send a ship loaded with 200 tons of basic foodstuffs from Larnaca in Cyprus. And a US warship is on its way with equipment to build a pier in Gaza, where ships carrying food can dock. But it may take 2 months for engineers to construct it. That will be too late for many. The UN says 576,000 people in Gaza are already suffering catastrophic levels of hunger.
The concern we have with this initiative and the airdrops are that population in need, they might not receive the quality of assistance they deserve. And by quality, quality requires 3 things: dignity in distribution, equity to ensure that the most vulnerable groups are receiving aid, and security for the recipient.
The UN says airdrops are costly and ineffective. And the airdrops and makeshift harbours are usually a last resort when supplying aid into enemy territories, which Israel is not to the US.
Why is the United States providing bombs and ammunition and financial support to a government that has stated its intent to starve civilians, and so giving Israel no restraint, no substantive constraint on money and weapons? It's almost incomprehensible.
Fakhri suggests that the US airdrops are aimed at pleasing a domestic audience with an eye to upcoming elections and won't stop Gaza starving to death. The US supports Israel financially and supplies weapons and military equipment. The White House recently pledged an additional $17.6 billion for military assistance.
Instead of saying they will build a port, stop providing the weapons they throw at us. American weapons are killing our kids. We don't need aid from them. We need them to stop the killing.
Israel denies blocking at least 2 land borders with Gaza. But aid agencies say delivering aid under bombardment is impossible, so only small amounts of aid enter the south, with barely anything reaching northern Gaza. UNRWA says that an average of 97 trucks were entering Gaza daily in February. At roughly 20 tons per truck, that's a little over 1,900 tons daily. The agency says just to meet people's most basic needs, there needs to be 500 trucks daily. That's 10,000 tons of aid every day. That can only happen with a ceasefire. Until then, people will continue to starve to death, with 335,000 under 5-year-olds being the most vulnerable. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest now. Here in Doha, we have Mansour Shouman. He is an aid activist who has been in Gaza throughout the war until 2 weeks ago. In Oslo, in Norway, Dr. Mads Gilbert is Professor of Emergency Medicine at the University of Tromso with long and extensive experience of working in Gaza. And in London, we have Marwan Bishara, Al Jazeera Senior Political Analyst. Welcome to the program. Mansour, we have two initiatives, the US initiative of a floating pier, and now the Europeans are saying they are considering now the sea corridor from Cyprus all the way to Gaza. Do people in Gaza trust these two initiatives will be more than enough to cater for all their basic needs?
I think the people in Gaza's first priority is security, is safety. They are looking towards a permanent ceasefire after going through 5 months of genocide and exile attempts, destroying all their belongings, their homes, killing their relatives, and making them live in tents in abhorrent conditions for the past few months. Unfortunately, the United States, when you talk about the US in front of the people of Gaza, they don't see them as a neutral entity anymore. They see them as siding with Israel. So I think it's a PR attempt by the Biden administration in order to appease their voting population in the United States. It's also a message that supports Israel when it comes to trying to stop UNRWA working in Gaza. They are trying to bypass these international organizations. They're trying to bypass the Palestinian people and trying to connect directly with them through ways that do not make sense when it comes to the quantity and the quality of the food, of the aid that is needed, especially with thousands of trucks laying outside the Rafah border. It's going to take a long time, and people are not going to be able to wait that long given the hunger situation. And I think similar analysis applies to the EU case as well.
Mads, you've extensively worked in Gaza. You have the northern part of the country, which is where people are in dire need for immediate help. And then you would assume that if you just open the crossings, aid will flow in smoothly, safely, and efficiently. Instead, the Americans and the Europeans are trying to work out something unprecedented, and we don't know how it's going to be implemented. Do you think that could be the only practical way to try to deal with the catastrophic situation in Gaza?
To build a seaport by the US is definitely not a way to solve the problems of hunger and the use of hunger as a weapon, as we see now by the Israelis. Absolutely not. It's absolutely the contrary. I just spoke to one of my young colleagues in Gaza, who is staffing one of the welcome points that they have established in southern Gaza to receive the people who are displaced from the north. And he said, this is only part of a political game. It is a very bad solution, he said, because it will force hungry people to this port. And that will be a new evacuation point of people to leave Gaza. It will create the structure for a new Nakba situation. And the Palestinians in Gaza, they know that leaving Gaza is a one-way ticket. So neither will it solve the immediate demand for helping out with the hunger, nor will it create any type of security for the Palestinians in Gaza, nor will it provide enough food. And the point is, there is enough food. It's sitting at the Rafah border. It is sitting at the crossing. Thousands of trucks. Just open it. Just lift the siege of Gaza, and this can be solved in a minute. And Biden never tried to have the siege lifted. So this is such a double standard. It makes me sick to the bone to hear it, because it has nothing to do with caring for the hunger, for the wounded, and for the needing people of Gaza. This is a political play, and it's more dangerous than nothing.
Marwan, a genuine attempt to provide help for the people of Gaza, or more of a PR campaign by both the Americans and the Europeans?
Well, I don't know about genuine. It could be desperate. That's one explanation. that the Biden administration is desperate to do something, anything, that will give the impression that it does feel for the people in Gaza, considering that the Biden administration has been complicit in the unraveling genocide in what is going on in Gaza. Notably that more than 4/5 of the ammunitions, of the bombs used by the Israeli army in Gaza is American. So America is implicated. And I think after 5 months of war crimes, of war on hospitals and children, of residential buildings, I think slowly but surely the Biden administration understands that not only it's implicated in the war crimes, that perhaps it is implicated in genocide. And there is a starvation policy on the part of Israel. It is trying to create famine in order to pressure Hamas into compromise. And hence, with its inability, apparently, to use its leverage willingly or unwillingly, meaning whether it is or has tried to use its leverage and did not work, or is unwilling to use its leverage, and hence, of course, not working, then it's trying to find a substitute. And the substitute is what you've been talking about, reporting, which is creating some kind of a port 500 meters away from Gaza, and then created a kind of a causeway from that port into the Gaza Strip itself, and then find a way to distribute it. It's very complicated. It's very risky. It's very expensive, and it's more likely than not will not work.
Okay. Mansour, you've been involved in aid activities in Gaza for quite some time. Now, give us a sense of what happens next when they decide to start unloading aid into the Strip. We don't have any specifics as we speak about the modalities of that, where the Israelis are going to be stepping in. Do you have any concerns that the situation could just be similar to the ones when we saw them airdropping aid when suddenly it turned into a tragedy?
Yes, I spoke to the aid workers, which I work with closely in the north, in the middle, and the southern region, and all three agreed on one thing, that in order for this to work, this needs to be organized together with a receiving entity from the Palestinian side. I mean, we need to be as well practical, and we need to be logical. People there are hungry. People there need any kind of aid. And what they're going to try to do, I think, is they're going to try to organize themselves in order to make sure that if this is successful in any way, even if we receive a few tons of aid, that people do not go ahead and run over each other and try to fight over a few tons of aid here and there. People in the north, in the middle, and the south will need to be organized. They will need to work with their local charity organizations, with UNRWA, with other established aid associations, in order to ensure that if any aid is provided through the EU, through the US, through the sport, that it is successfully received to the Palestinian people, even if it only helps 1% of the population. That's better than nothing. But again, that doesn't solve the root cause of the problem, the lack of security, the lack of any kind of peace. And like the commentators here said, there are thousands of trucks available on the Rafah border. They can easily solve it by ceasefire and all these trucks entering.
Mads, 1 in 6 children under the age of 2 is acutely malnourished in Gaza. As we speak, the Americans, the Europeans, and the Israelis did not come up with a specific plan about how they're going to gather that aid, vital supplies, medicine, food, and then how is it going to be distributed, where the Israelis are going to have a bigger say, what will be the reaction of the desperate local population. Couldn't this end up becoming a disaster?
Yeah, it is already a catastrophe. It is a disaster. It's an avalanche of human suffering, which is man-made 100% by the deadly coalition between Israel and the United States, as Mansour just said. So we know already, because Dr. Youssef Aborish, the Minister of Health in Gaza, said 2.5 months ago, he said that the triangle of death in Gaza now, it is hunger, it is lack of water, and it is disease. And we know from the investigations that have been done that the number of kids below 2 years with life-threatening diarrhea is now 70% of the kids. It's 23 times more than 2 years ago when this was last investigated. So there is no time to wait. That's the point. These kids are starving. Yesterday, the Minister of Health reported 18 deaths from starvation in Shifa Hospital. This maritime port will take maybe 30, maybe 60 days to be built. And at the same time, there are thousands of trucks with food and water standing waiting. So the problem here, the real political problem for Biden and the US administration, is that they don't have any leverage on Israel by just talking. What they have to do is to say no more bombs, no more money until you open Rafah and end the siege of Gaza. Because in the meantime, while we are discussing and drinking coffee and eating in our homes for breakfasts, the kids in Gaza will be dying. So it is an immediate need for food and water and to treat the sick and deceased ones. Actually, Dr. Youssef Abrish said that more people are dying from starvation, dehydration, and disease than from the bombing itself now. So this is so immediate that this whole plan can also be seen as a way to keep this waiting game going and kill more people, as the Israelis want.
Marwan, how do you explain that the Americans and the EU came together announcing both initiatives without any guarantees that we're going to see a peace plan, an agreement, a ceasefire that could be conducive to aid being channeled into Gaza?
Yes, that's precisely why I said it's a desperate move. I don't think it's well thought through. I think Biden decided at one point, after a number of steps, to pressure Netanyahu into behaving like a human being, and failing to do so, he then basically acted desperately, such as proposing this kind of a way of dispatching aid to Gaza. He started with parachuting, and now there's the port. But clearly, President Biden, after dispatching Blinken and failing, his Secretary of State, after unleashing Kamala Harris, his vice president, and failing, and after bringing Gantz, the war criminal general, in order to put more pressure on Netanyahu, and failing, after making a number of timid statements and not working, then he decided to do this, right? He basically come out to the open and says the Israelis are not letting the food in. They're basically using the humanitarian assistance as a bargaining chip. That is in by itself a war crime. Basically, the American president in his State of the Union had indirectly accused Israel of war crimes in Gaza, starving people in Gaza as a bargaining chip against Hamas. So why is that all important, Hashem? And I think that sort of follows from what we've heard earlier from your guests. There is no logistical problem in Gaza. There is no, I would even say, aid problem in Gaza, even though the people in Gaza are starving. There's a political problem. There's a criminality problem. And the political problem is that there's a war that isn't going on, and neither Israel nor America would call for an immediate and permanent ceasefire. One. Two, America would not use its leverage, as Mads said, with Israel in terms of stopping the financial aid and stopping the military aid to Israel in order to force it to stop its inhumane policy, its war crimes, its genocide in Gaza. Once Israel stops its inhumane genocidal policy in Gaza, everything else will follow. Because what we have there in Gaza is not a tsunami, and hence there's a problem in getting the aid in. There's a war that needs to be stopped. America can get Israel to stop it if it wants to.
Mansour, you've been throughout the war in Gaza until 2 weeks ago. Give us a sense of life in the Strip just a few days before you left.
Yeah, I left Gaza temporarily on February the 27th, so just under 2 weeks ago. And my last memories was being trapped in the city of Khan Yunis, especially on the western side of that city, while the Israeli forces were raiding the civilian homes and the population there. I remember for days, together with many other civilians, we were filtering well water using sand, using coarse rocks, using some cotton buds in order to ensure that we had enough drinking water to survive. Together with many hundreds of others, we were all fasting every day from sunrise to sunset, relying on one meal a day, which can be as little as half a can of beans for a group of like 6 to 7 people. The situation there is very dire. And we're talking about the south, which is supposed to be better than places like the north and the middle region. What is happening there is a genocide. What is happening there is unseen. I haven't heard or seen anything like this for decades. And I am still shocked that the governments of the world, that the United Nations, have not acted in any way to put a stop to it. Like your guest said, it is a problem that can be easily solved for the humanitarian crisis, for hunger. Ceasefire right now, open the borders, and I am sure that everyone will be happy to see that 2.4 million civilians are being well fed, are being taken care of from their health point of view, and hopefully the political situation gets resolved over the next few weeks. But hunger needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And this ploy of the EU and the US setting up this port 500 meters away, it's just a way to a Panadol, just a way to ease the effect, ease the pain, while they can solve the problem as soon as possible using other methods.
Dr. Mads, the health system has been almost decimated in Gaza. Whatever happens tomorrow or in a month from now, will it ever be able to bring back the medical sector in Gaza to what it was before October the 7th?
I'm sure. The heroes are the Palestinian doctors and nurses and paramedics and medical students and nursing students. They have been phenomenal. They have been the beacon of hope and the moral compass to the world, because they have never left their patients nor their people. They have been killed by the hundreds, almost 400 killed, hundreds arrested and tortured, and still they stand tall. They will start to refunction once we can reopen, restore, and repair the Palestinian healthcare system under Palestinian leadership. Let us not make the mistake that we turn Gaza into a beggar community, a dependent community like Afghanistan, because what we need is to support Palestinian sovereignty, and the hospitals are not that damaged. They can be restored once we have security for the patients and the staff, and we have a stop in the bombing. Now, for the question of this starvation weapon that Israel is using with the support of the US, I have to ask this question, because one thing we avoid discussing is the deep-rooted racism and colonial attitude that is governing both the EU and the United States, and of course Israel. How many Jewish children would Biden have allowed to be starved to death by an enemy who was incarcerating a Jewish community and denying them water, food, and medical supplies and bombing them? We know the answer: 0. And when you allow the Israelis, with the support of the US, to kill 12,500 Palestinian children and to starve them and thirst them to death, this is such a massive attack on our humanity, and it is such a disgrace for our civilization. And that needs to be at the core of the discussion now. We don't have another day to wait. We must act now to put pressure. And the only pressure we can put is political sanctions. It is the leverage to stop the bomb supply and the money supply to Israel and stop them from killing more people. And they are, just the last 24 hours, I got a message from the Ministry of Health today, 85 killed and 130 injured the last 24 hours in 8 massacres. So the killing is going on as the world is debating, should we go here and there? And one more point I like to add. By omitting Rafah and Khmer Shalom as the 2 main entry points for their trucks, Israel can close off the fence completely in the south and then continue with their invasion and their massacres in Rafah, because they can point to that seaport entry and say, oh, go up there and get the food. So this is a very dangerous game they're playing. And I think the only reason why Israel allows the US to start building the seaport is precisely to get 100% control over Rafah and to end it. Yeah, you see my point.
Marwan, the notion of 2 aid initiatives, the Sea Corridor and the floating dock, create a sense of resolution, a sense of finally we're going to see an end to the conflict, an end to the war, and an end to the suffering of the people of Gaza. The Israelis, on the other hand, insist they will continue their offensive. The Rafah is just a matter of time before it starts, and that they are adamant on the need to destroy Hamas. Both notions of aid, on the other hand, no sense of vision about what happens next in Gaza. How do you see it?
You know, I actually, well, maybe perhaps because I'm a bit skeptical or too skeptical, but I actually see it going in the opposite direction. I think the Americans understand that this war is over, meaning it cannot achieve its objectives, and now it's just basically killing people for no good reason whatsoever. For 5 months, the collateral damage has been the population of Gaza, the people, the children, the women, and so on and so forth of Gaza. Hamas was the collateral damage. The real target, the real target has been Gaza and its civilians, and the collateral damage has been the fighters in Gaza. And I think Israel's inability to achieve its objectives, but its insistence on continuing with the war, necessitated that the United States must do something in order to keep up the appearances of being holier than thou, humane and humanitarian, and try to help the situation in Gaza. Now, the thing is, right, that instead of going through Cyprus, Larnaca, and so on and so forth, and 350 kilometers away from the shores of Gaza, they could have sent the same aid to Ashdod or to Ashkelon, 12 or 18 kilometers from northern border of Gaza. That's within Israel. Because Israel today apparently will be inspecting all the cargo that will leave Cyprus to Gaza. It could have done the same, but in Israel, in southern Israel, and the trucks could have gone easily into Gaza. Mm-hmm. The problem here, the inside story, if you will, right, is that there is a racist Israeli government that actually want to starve the people in Gaza, want to create the conditions for ethnic cleansing. It wants to push the people out, if it can, by whatever hook or crook. And hence, although it can get the food into its own ports and deliver it to Gaza, it won't. And that's why the United States is acting so desperately.
I see a point. UN aid agencies are saying that an estimated 300,000 people trapped in the northern part of Gaza still face delicate situation, no food and clean water. WFP is suspending operations there because it's saying basically it's just not safe. Gentlemen, we're running out of time. I really appreciate your insight. Looking forward to having this same conversation with you in the near future. Mansour Shouman, Dr. Mads Gilbert, Marwan, Bishara, thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.